Hello, and welcome to our webcast. I'm Amy Pendergrass with Moss Adams, and I'm going to get us started for today's session, Combat Disruption with a SOC for Supply Chain Examination. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief video.
Welcome, and thank you for viewing our webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
All right, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters from Moss Adams. We have Sue Wells, IT Compliance Director, and Bosco Yuen, SOC Managing Director. And now I would like to turn the floor over to Bosco to kick us off.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome everyone. I'd love to be able to host our webcast today on SOC for Supply Chain. My name is Bosco Yuen, SOC Managing Director. I oversee our California practice here at Moss Adams. Prior to Moss Adams, I was with a Big Four for over 12 years, specializing in SOC, SOC 1, SOC 2s, SOC for Supply Chain. SOX, S-O-X, I know it's confusing, SOX 404, Sarbanes-Oxley, and also internal audit as well. I do have my CPA and CIA to really understand the financial reporting, business process side of things. Also, I do have my CIA and CISB to understand the IT side of things. So a unique capability to really bridge the gap between our financial reporting, some of our CFOs, controllers, and also our IT side as well on the CISOs and CIOs as well. So welcome everyone. Sue?
Hi everyone, thanks Bosco. I began my career in a supply chain industry with working for a Fortune 500 company in internal audit as an operations control consultant, which led to about a decade of controllerships in industries including wood, paper, corrugate, and finally the beverage industry. After working on a large IT project to implement an ERC and package it at my plant, and for PepsiCo, I became interested in IT and became a CISA. And I used my experience basically from working in manufacturing and then as a financial controller and then my IT to bridge the gap and consult in multiple areas in supply chain organizations. I'm currently a director of IT, basically IT audit with Moss Adams. I oversee and am the signing CPA for the SOC engagements. And I also oversee IT audits and cyber engagements, as well as consulting in all of those areas. So really happy to be here to speak with you guys today.
Thank you, Sue. Well, this is a high-level agenda of what we're going to be talking today about. Really help you understand the SOC for supply chain. What are the impacts and key benefits to you? Go into a little bit detail of the SOC examination criteria, and then wrap up with a summary and next steps. So without further ado, I want to just jump right into really understanding some of the disruptions from the supply chain that you may have experienced for the past couple of years with COVID, the war with Russia and Ukraine, suppliers' lack of financial well-being, other things that really make sure that we don't encounter some of these disruptions going forward. And so one of the things that we could look at is the SOC for supply chain examination. So before we even jump into specifically SOC for supply chain, what is SOC? What is a SOC report? And so similar to a financial statement audit, where a third party, a financial statement auditor, comes in to be able to provide reasonable assurance that your financial statement is accurate and complete. A SOC audit is similar in the fact that a third party like Moss Adams would come in and be able to attest not to the financial statement, but to the processes, internal controls, operations, or even IT side of the organization. And so that's why you may have heard about the SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3s. The SOC for supply chain is just a narrower scope specific to the operation side of the supply chain and really understanding all the controls, all the risks that are tied to supply chain. So that's really a broad understanding of the SOC for supply chain is a third-party attestation over your organization or your supplier or vendor's organization so that you could gain confidence over the accuracy and completeness of the internal controls, similar to the accuracy and control of the financial statement audit. So what are the benefits to you? The three main benefits to you really is to, one, differentiate yourselves from your competitors. That helps you win more customers and therefore increasing your revenue and your profits. The second is increasing your valuation and giving confidence to your investors, to your board, to your customers or prospects. And third is to really understand and mitigate any significant supply chain risk and implement best practices so don't encounter some of the disruptions that we've seen in the past couple of years. And so we'll go through each one in further detail. The first one, as we mentioned, is differentiate yourself from your competitors, right? There's a number of competition out there, and for you to be able to differentiate yourselves, some people actually put the SOC 3 report onto their website as a public declaration that the AICPA board, which is the governing board of the SOC supply chain, has already certified and tested that you as an organization have already passed the SOC for supply chain examination. Another way that other people have differentiated is this is a third-party attestation. So once you have this report, you could be able to distribute this report to all your customers, to show your prospects, to your investors, to your boards. It's one way to be able to give them full confidence that a third party has come in and be able to attest it, that all the processes, controls, all the significant risk related to the supply chain have been evaluated and also mitigated as well. So those are some of the things that will help drive winning more customers and prospects, so therefore obviously increasing the growth of your organization and profits and revenues as well. The second one is increasing the valuation and confidence from your investors, your board, and your customers and prospects as well. Knowing that they already have, that you've hired a third party to come in, look at it with clear eyes to be able to look at the controls, processes, risk, and really put controls in place to make sure that everything is operating effectively and accurate and completely, really increases your valuation if you're planning to go public or really just trying to grow. I think that's a great way to be able to instill confidence to investors, boards, customers, and prospects as well. And the third key benefit would be understanding and mitigating your significant risk. Before we actually conduct the SOC audit, we would recommend doing a SOC gap assessment. So that during this gap assessment is going through your processes, the controls that are already in place, and really understanding what are the significant risks that we're really seeing in the organization. We'll be implementing best practices to identify those controls and processes, and then also identify any gaps, significant risks that we're identifying and seeing, so that we could be able to work with you to come up with mitigating strategies, best practices, things that are trending to be able to make sure that those risks are getting reduced and mitigated appropriately as well. And so those are the things that would be key to make sure that your organization is free from, mitigating risk from breaches, security incidents, other issues that can lead to other risk, reputational damage, loss of intellectual property. Part of it may be that you've maybe outsourced a key part of the supply chain to a vendor or a supplier, or you are that vendor or supplier, and understanding how customer data is getting managed and if it's going to be encrypted at rest or in transit, what that looks like, because a lot of the risk ends up being a lot of the vendors that you have outsourced part of it to, and if there's any issues with their disruptions, it's going to have some impact on you. It could lead to reputational damage, loss of intellectual property, loss of customer data, which then could lead to fines, penalties, any litigations. And so those are things that we would evaluate during that gap assessment and make sure that those are mitigated before we actually go into the actual audit. Some of you may be concerned about independence. There is no independence issue or conflict being the financial statement auditor, doing the gap assessment, and doing the actual SOC exam and audit. So we've actually done it all three, having one firm be able to do the financial statement audit, the gap assessment for the SOC, and also the SOC audit examination. Having one team to really understand your environment, process, really streamlines and makes it a lot more efficient and effective for you as one organization, really understanding that all together. So those are the three main benefits to you. Really, who should really be completing the SOC examination? Really, there's two buckets of main two groups. First is going to be the manufacturing, production, and distribution companies. This may be a request from your investors, your customers, your prospects. You may be hearing more about requests from SOC 1s and SOC 2s. The SOC for supply chain is one that is growing in demand and is really picking up pace, and a lot of your customers and your investors are asking for that as well. And if you're a vendor or supplier, really as being deemed key part of the supply chain process, if there's any disruptions, is making sure that you can give your customers and prospects that assurance that you already have those controls in place to minimize that disruption. And so if you are also hiring other vendors and suppliers, is to ask for that ask for that SOC for supply chain, because that will give you additional comfort that your vendors and suppliers are having controls and managing their customer data, making sure that the controls and processes are in place as well. And so those are some things to consider as well. It hits a number of industries. Obviously, there are a number of industries that are a little bit more prone to understanding the SOC for supply chain. So this could be aerospace and defense, construction, government services, manufacturing and consumer products, including retail, power and utilities, and obviously transportation and logistics as well. So that's a good high-level understanding of SOC for supply chain. Sue will take us further into depth of understanding the SOC examination criteria, both the description criteria and the trust service criteria. So Sue? Sorry, you're on mute.
Thanks, Bosco. Just to reiterate what Bosco said, this SOC report and SOC examination can allow you to distinguish yourself in the competitive market. The reason it is so good at that, just to go back to when Bosco was talking about numerous types of SOC reporting, the SOC exam is great at testing and examining and allowing a CPA to actually opine on non-financial aspects of a business. And it enables, based on the fact that we're going to discuss like criteria, it allows you to have an apples to apples comparison with two different like manufacturers, suppliers, distributors, because you have to be evaluated based on these two required criteria. The first is description criteria, which we will get into a little bit more in depth in my next slide. But this is the framework that an organization uses to present a description of its production, manufacturing, or distribution systems. If you've been involved in compliance or governance or IT controls or even purchasing, and you've seen a SOC report for either the financial side for a SOC 1 or the SOC 2 for an IT provider, you will notice there's what we think of as that narrative section that describes the business. That's what your description criteria is. And what you're reading in those reports are not general information. They're prescribed by the AICPA in the way that the AICPA prescribes what you have to describe when you present a SOC for supply chain report. So the trust, and then there are the trust surfaces criteria, which you're familiar with if you have seen those SOC reports, and that we evaluate your controls against standard AICPA criteria. The standardization of this report provided by the description criteria and the trust services criteria will enable you to compare, again, as I keep going back to the apples to apples. You can take logistics company A and logistics company B and compare them because they've both been evaluated based on like criteria. So what is description criteria? What is required to be in that narrative section of a SOC for supply chain? First and foremost, you have to clarify the types of goods or services that you're providing. It's very important to remember that if you're a conglomerate type company with multiple products, you are capable of picking a product or any key products that are key parts to some of your customers' business, or you may have more customer requests for information around the production of that particular item. You can basically focus the scope on any area of your business that you think is going to be of most interest to some of your larger customers. You have to target your principal system objectives. What commitments and requirements for a product's performance, production, manufacturing, or distribution is required? If you're covering a period of time, which I would say is going to fall somewhere after the gap assessment that Bosco mentioned, and even some consulting to be able to do a period of time SOC for supply chain report. But should you be covering a period of time, if there were any system incidents that resulted from ineffective controls that prevented you from meeting commitments and requirements, you would be required to disclose that. That said, that's why we usually like to get our clients started on consulting and gap assessments so that we never actually have to do that. We also want to evaluate the risks. You're required to evaluate what are the risks that could prevent me from meeting my requirements to a customer, or the specific specifications related to a product that is a key production piece to your customer's production process. Other parts of the description criteria include relevant system information. We're going to talk about your manufacturing system, your controls around that, the inputs to your system, and the boundaries of your system. We'll talk about controls that are necessary by both your vendors and your customers for your controls to work. Some of these things include, let's imagine that you have a key widget that needs to be prepared, that needs to be manufactured to a certain specification, and you purchase that widget from another manufacturer. You may request a SOC for supply chain report from that manufacturer because there are certain controls that you expect that they have in place so that your widget will get to you when you need your widget and in the time frame and be at the specification you need for your manufacturing process. That's kind of the interesting thing about the SOC for supply chain is if you're a supply chain company, more than likely you are someone's key vendor. But on the flip side, you have key vendors, and these SOC for supply chain reports and examinations and consulting services help everyone that's part of that chain. You're going to underscore trust service criteria. These are specifics prescribed by the AICPA that enable you to evaluate your manufacturing process and controls by like standards and criteria. If you've been on a path where you've done several of these reports in a row, from one year to the next, if something changes in your control environment or your manufacturing process, or really anything significant, including key leaders in the company, you would disclose that in a SOC report. The trust service categories that primarily apply in a supply chain situation are really all of them. The first three is security. And if you've looked at a SOC 2 report because of your involvement in compliance or purchasing for your company, you've probably seen this for a IT provider. How it applies to a supply chain or manufacturer or service or logistics company is it's going to describe and test the controls on how the supply chain addresses your commitments regarding system protection from physical and logical risks, includes cybersecurity risk, such as how customer data is protected. That's very important in that you may have access to proprietary information of your customers that they would not want disclosed. Availability. This is a great one to have in a SOC for supply chain, because most of the time, if you are a key vendor, you will get lots of questions and requests related to your business continuity or disaster recovery plan. This report will actually tell your customers that, hey, we do have those plans, and oh, by the way, a third party has actually looked at them and the testing that we do on these plans. Processing integrity, key for manufacturing. We're going to talk about the controls, about the inputs, the controls to make sure that your equipment doesn't break down, or backups in case of people or emergencies. Processing integrity is going to tie back to some of those environmental control incidents that Bosco mentioned, and that you have to disclose, in addition to the ones that you have in availability, how your system is set up and has controls around it to prevent those disruptions. Confidentiality. This is related to this achievement of specific confidentiality commitments made to customers or business partners, such as the commitments made to the business partner regarding the use of, again, intellectual property, patents, confidential data that you need to manufacture their product to their specification. Privacy, most companies have to attest in many areas to their privacy practices, their policy, how they collect information and when it's shared. And this is going to provide some coverage, again, back to the intellectual property. Or should you have such a customized product that you as a customer might have to provide a vendor with your actual customer list and any names and addresses related. So to tie back to Bosco's presentation and also everything that we've talked about this morning, we just want to reiterate what we see as the key benefits for either having a SOC for supply chain gap assessment at the start, and then working your way possibly to the SOC for supply chain examination, having it done for yourself, or does this pique your interest and make you want to ask these questions of your key vendors? You could be looking at it from both perspectives. So the number one reason it makes companies comparable is that you do have a common set of criteria for disclosures about manufacturing, production, and distribution systems. And again, the great thing about SOC reports is they're very good at evaluating non-numerical, non-financial data. It does provide that common set of data for assessing control designs and operating effectiveness. This third bullet is what I think is most important, and I've seen it be extremely helpful for every type of SOC service I've provided. It reduces the required communication between organizations related to information about manufacturing, production, and distribution. Most of the time, probably the most common SOC report in the world right now is the SOC 2. If a company is providing some type of technology services to a customer, that customer frequently wants to see their SOC 2 to evaluate the security and processing integrity and availability as applicable. Prior to the SOC 2, what I used to see is purchasing departments would hand out voluminous questionnaires that they would expect their key IT vendor to complete. What I don't know about the volume of the questionnaires, but I know that if you're a manufacturer or your logistics provider, you are going to provide to a Fortune 500 company, or really anyone who considers your product or service to be key to their product or service, they're going to vet you very heavily. A great way to reduce a lot of questions and a lot of back and forth is the ability to hand off a report that says, yes, I have these things in place, and oh, by the way, I'm not just filling out your form the way that I think you want it to be filled out. Somebody came in here with a second set of eyes and has vetted these processes. It provides that standard for communicating relevant information without, as I mentioned earlier, being required to disclose trade secrets, patents, or other intellectual property, your secret sauce, as I like to call it. You don't have to disclose any of that. It enables you to maintain a standard for organizations when you compare various vendors. So you can use SOC for supply chain to compare your vendors, and then you can also have one performed to allow your customers to compare you against other vendors. And oh, by the way, if you're the vendor that has the SOC for supply chain, you've already are probably levels ahead of your competition. So to tie back to the overall SOC practice that Moss Adams has, we are experienced SOC providers, which means Bosco and I and all of our teams and colleagues are very good at evaluating controls that have nothing to do with a balance sheet or a financial statement or even system access. These reports allow us to compare non-numerical, non-financial data. Our experience in the SOC world at Moss Adams is prolific. We have last year alone, we issued 500 SOC reports. There are 100 fully dedicated SOC professionals. Moss Adams has been providing these types of services since 2003. Due to our size and, the market share that we have, we work with the AICPA on any changes they're going to be making on SOC standards. We have hundreds of clients who every year have a recurring SOC examination that they are providing out to their customers. We're the internal auditor of choice for more than 50 public and global companies. And then we are heavily involved in the ongoing education as regulations and public perceptions change. To revisit the SOC, what the AICPA calls the SOC suite of services, I just want to talk about the other things that we are able to do in that area. If you've listened to this and realize, hey, the SOC for supply chain isn't exactly what I'm concerned about now. What we know is that there are going to be additional requirements for SEC companies in the next couple of years in the area of environmental, social, and corporate governance. We can use SOC reporting to help our customers indicate to their customers, help our clients indicate to their customers that they have addressed those areas and they have a framework and they're going to be able to be responsive for any information that their customers are going to ask for. There's a SOC for cybersecurity, which is an internal report that goes to boards and governance committees. SOC 1, SOC 2. We can add HIPAA or any other framework to the SOC 2. And as Bosco mentioned earlier, there's the SOC 3 that, oh, by the way, you can put that on your website and say, hey, a third party's come in and looked at our controls. That's all I've got for this morning, but I'd like to hand it back over to Bosco to go into some of the other areas where we can use this knowledge and background to help our customers and clients.
Thanks a lot, Sue. This is just sort of a broad overview in case you were curious about other items besides tax and audit. Obviously, we have a full-blown consulting practice in wealth management, similar to, as I mentioned, I was with the Big Four for over 12 years. Pretty much almost every single service that they provide is the same thing as at Moss Adams as well. So you could sort of see compliance, internal audit, operational audits, compliance audits, Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX, in addition to SOC. So a number of things across strategy and operations that we could be able to help with some of the planning and be able to do risk assessments as well, gap assessment as we talked about. So even if you don't necessarily need to do the audit right away, doing a gap assessment over the entire process would be able to be beneficial for you to really understand the risk, that we be able to identify the controls, processes, significant risk, and be able to help build a roadmap of what we could do, be able to help recommend some of the things to mitigate some of those risks and disruptions going forward as well. So this is sort of a big picture of what else Moss Adams could do, just so that you are aware of those things. And specifically within, I guess, IT practice, you could really have a greater understanding of the compliance. There's a number of things with SOC could cover the IT sides as well, internal audits, SOCs as well, ISO, FedRAMP, penetration testing. We do have a whole cybersecurity team, and also, as I mentioned, I was part of the IT consulting as well, so we could do a number of assessments, both on the IT side and on the business process financial side as well. If there's pre-IPO or post-mergers, we can also do that as well. So a number of other things that if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to myself and Sue. Happy to address those as well. So with that, we're happy to help. This is our contact information. We'll leave this open to Q&A at this time.
All right. We do have a couple questions in our Q&A window that I wanted to throw out. And then to our audience, feel free to add additional questions using the Q&A window in your console. This one's for you, Bosco. It says, you mentioned you had 12 plus years of Big Four experience. Is that just for SOX SOC, or does that include supply chain experience for SOX, the SOX, and or internal audit too? Hopefully that wasn't too confused.
Yeah, no, I know that gets a little confusing with SOC and SOX, but yes, I've done both here at Moss Adams and at Deloitte for over 12 years, specializing in really understanding the best practices for SOC, and SOX, and internal audit for supply chain vendors. So really understanding the operations, understanding the whole process from beginning to end, from suppliers to vendors, and really understanding what the latest trends are and best practices are. So whether it's going to be SOC, SOX, internal audit, really be able to really understand the core root of the issues, really mitigate that during this disruptive time, and really be able to help and add value to the organization. And therefore, I think ultimately, not only does it significantly address the risk, but also add enough value to be able to increase the valuation that we talked about, and also therefore increasing more customers and profits, and revenue and profits as well.
All right, great. And another one is, besides SOC SOX for supply chain, can you elaborate more on the SOX 1 and SOX 2 that have been pretty popular recently?
Yeah, that's a good question. For the SOC 1s and SOC 2s, those have been pretty popular across the board. SOC 1s, who may not necessarily be as familiar, those could be more on the financial reporting side or more of the business transactions. So some people have alluded to going the SOC 1 route, and part of that is there's a lot more flexibility in terms of what you want in that scope. And so that is a report SOC 1, especially the type 2, is relied on by the financial statement auditors. And so including that as part of the process could be a good way. As part of the gap assessment, it could be scoped in for specific supply chain, but we can also scope in other areas for the financial reporting areas or other transactions that will be key for your investors or boards, or even for your customers and prospects. That's where we can sort of tailor the scope towards you and your organization in terms of what you think is going to be the biggest risk. And then SOC 2, that could be more operational or on the IT side for the systems. So that's a good way, as you had mentioned, that's another growing area, tremendous growth both on the SOC 1 and SOC 2 side of areas that, again, they can get this report and to be able to distribute it to their customers and prospects to increase valuation, increase confidence, and then be able to reduce the number of due diligence reports and questionnaires that your customers may be asking you to fill out. Just produce this one report to your customers, and it should fulfill many of the requirements that they're asking for.
All right, thank you. And that is all of the questions we have at this point, but feel free to reach out to our presenters if you think of additional questions. Their contact information is listed here as well as in your console. I can close this out unless either of you have anything else you want to add.
No, I just want to thank you everyone for everyone's time today. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Sue at any time. I'm happy to be able to provide second opinion, any other additional complimentary educational sessions to be able to help you and your organization grow. So looking forward to it.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks to everyone who showed up today. We really appreciate it.
All right, and thank you, Sue and Bosco, for a great presentation today. And for those of you that would like a copy of today's slides, you can download them from the folder that says slide deck and handouts. And then we're also sending them via email tomorrow along with a recording of this webcast. And then finally, here's a link to an online survey for today's presentation. And thank you for joining our webcast. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.